Did Cleopatra look like Hollywood's version? Perhaps one of the most famous looks in cinematic history is this one, Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra, Queen of the Nile. But what did Cleopatra really look like? Was she anything like the Hollywood version, or did she look very different? Let us take a look at some of the surviving evidence and see what we can learn about how Cleopatra may have looked. We know that Cleopatra lived around the years 69 to 30 BC. She was born in Alexandria and was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. But it is important to remember that the Ptolemies were actually of Greek heritage, not Egyptian. They spoke Greek, and their culture was more closely tied to that of the Hellenistic world rather than ancient Egypt. Cleopatra's mother was Cleopatra I, and her father was Ptolemy XII. And when they ruled over Egypt, they had a number of siblings, but many of them died under mysterious circumstances. Some say their father had them killed so that he could secure the throne for himself. When Cleopatra's father passed away, she and her younger sister, Arsinoe IV, became co-regents. But Cleopatra was only 14 years old at the time, so her mother acted as regent until Cleopatra came of age. However, things didn't go well between the two sisters. The older sister, Cleopatra, was married to her brother, Ptolemy XIII, but he died after only a few years of marriage. Then Cleopatra wanted to marry her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, instead, which caused Arsinoe to flee to Rome for protection. It's not entirely clear why Cleopatra wanted to marry her own brother. Perhaps she was trying to keep the throne within the family. After all, the Ptolemaic dynasty had come to power after Alexander the Great had conquered Egypt and his general, Ptolemy I, had seized the throne for himself. But now the situation was delicate and Cleopatra needed allies. And so she decided to cozy up to Rome. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, Cleopatra famously hid in a rug like a carpet and snuck into his palace undetected. In return, Caesar helped her secure the throne, and she even bore him a son named Caesarion. But when Mark Antony came along, Cleopatra left Caesar behind, and the two of them had twins, a boy and a girl. Once again, Cleopatra had secured her position by cozying up to powerful Romans. But this time, her plan backfired. When Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, heard about Cleopatra's affair with Mark Antony, he declared war against her. This led to the end of the Ptolemaic kingdom and the beginning of Roman Egypt. So when we are talking about Cleopatra's appearance, we are talking about someone who was born a Greek-speaking Ptolemaic and spent much of her life in Alexandria, where the cultures of the Mediterranean world kind of mixed together. Cleopatra was well known throughout the ancient world, and there are numerous accounts of her appearance and personality. Of course, there are also numerous legends surrounding the events of her life, so it can be difficult to separate fact from fiction. Let's begin with an iconic scene from the classic film Cleopatra starring Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra. The famous image of her reclining on a golden couch while lounging poolside has become synonymous with Cleopatra herself. But did Cleopatra look like this? Well, sadly, there are no surviving portraits of Cleopatra. The official coinage of her era does feature her likeness, but the image on the coins is more reminiscent of Roman imperial coinage than it is of any living person. In fact, Cleopatra's official image was likely based off of a Greek goddess. This image of her as a divine figure is also reflected in the coin inscriptions, which often call her Nu. The name Cleo means glory and Patra means father. So put together, Cleopatra means the glory of her father. Her title, Nu, refers to the Greek goddess Athena, who was known for her wisdom and strategic warfare. As far as we can tell, the only official busts and statues of Cleopatra were created after her death, probably during the reign of Augustus, who was the first emperor of Rome. And as you can see, these images are quite idealized and un-Egyptian looking. There are also numerous images of Cleopatra in medieval art, but again, they don't really resemble anything Egyptian either. And when we move to the modern era, we find that the image of Cleopatra continues to be interpreted by artists according to whatever stereotypes they are working with. For example, in the 1800s, writers and artists started linking Cleopatra with the occult and portraying her with snake imagery. But there is one image that seems to have captured the popular imagination. It comes from a medieval manuscript called the Chronicle of Florence, which was written about 800 years ago, and yet it has inspired countless images of Cleopatra through the centuries. This image shows Cleopatra as a beautiful woman with long flowing hair, wearing a diadem on her head. But let us take a closer look at this image because there are a few interesting details worth pointing out. First, Cleopatra is shown wearing a type of dress that looks somewhat Egyptian. It has thin vertical lines that seem to mimic the shape of a traditional Egyptian dress. But the way that her hair is shown, that is certainly not Egyptian. That detail alone tells us that this image is not meant to be a realistic portrayal of Cleopatra, but rather a more idealized version. The truth is we have very little evidence of what Cleopatra actually looked like. Most of what we think we know about her appearance comes from a letter written by Roman statesman and philosopher Pliny the Younger. He wrote to a friend about seeing the Egyptian Queen Cleopatra, and he said that her actual appearance was less impressive than her reputation. He goes on to describe her as having a rather plain face and body, but with a striking gaze. And this is where the story of her having mesmerizing eyes comes from. Historians generally agree that Cleopatra was highly intelligent, skilled in diplomacy, and a gifted leader. So if she did indeed have piercing eyes, they would have been the perfect accessory for winning arguments and commanding respect from her subjects and rivals alike. So perhaps the real Cleopatra did have a striking gaze, but her beauty was not her greatest asset. Historian and author Stacy Schiff wrote a biography of Cleopatra called Cleopatra, A Life. And in it, she says, quote, "Her features, according to those who saw her, were not classically beautiful, though her eyes were striking. But her appearance and bearing made a powerful impression. She dressed with elegance, often in white linen, veiling her head and shoulders. With fine linen, she wore no jewels, but her diadem was usually wreathed with flowers." This sounds pretty consistent with the description we get from Pliny the Younger. Now, here is something that might surprise you. Some historians believe that Cleopatra had red hair. There is a passage in a book called De Origine Actis Hispanorum, and it was written by a Spanish philosopher named Mayorum, and it survives only in a medieval manuscript. But this book was originally written in the 1st century AD, and in this particular passage, Cleopatra is described as having bright red hair. But do we really have to believe what this medieval copyist wrote down? Probably not. In the absence of any solid evidence for what Cleopatra looked like, people have taken creative liberties to imagine what she might have looked like. This image of Cleopatra has persisted through the centuries, largely thanks to the popularity of Shakespeare's play about her life. In the plays, Cleopatra is depicted as a tragic heroine whose downfall was brought about by her passionate love affair with Mark Antony. And this image of Cleopatra as a tragic heroine has only been reinforced by countless books, plays, films, and TV shows about her life. Author Stacy Schiff writes, "If the ancients had Instagram, Cleopatra would have been an influencer. She understood the power of self-promotion. While her predecessors had appeared on coins draped in dowdy robes, Cleopatra posed in elaborate, sometimes revealing clothing that displayed her figure to advantage. One coin shows her riding a horse with the reins held in one hand, and the other rests on the hip of a nude woman riding behind her. Another shows her seated on a throne with two nude women flanking her." So what was Cleopatra wearing? Well, her style was definitely influenced by the fashions of both Greece and Rome, but she didn't exclusively wear Greek or Roman styles. Instead, she developed her own unique style that combined the best of the Mediterranean world. Author Stacy Schiff writes, "Cleopatra's style was partly a means of asserting her dynasty's claim to Egyptian origins. Just as pharaohs since the 18th dynasty had worn the red crown of Upper Egypt, a tall red crown decorated with a cobra or uraeus, Cleopatra favored a tall crown set with precious stones. Her jewelry was typically Egyptian, although she also wore the gold chain or torque favored by Greek women. So did Cleopatra look like Elizabeth Taylor? Probably not. The surviving evidence suggests that Cleopatra was nothing like the Hollywood version. She wasn't Egyptian-looking, but instead probably looked Greek. However, her style may have resembled Egyptian fashion more closely. So was Cleopatra the most beautiful woman in the world? Well, maybe she was. But if she was, it was probably because of her charisma, charm, and intelligence, not just her looks. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe and come along for more fun. And until next time, happy excavating.